Well, in this hour, we're going to be talking about the best states for racial equality in civic engagement. Yes, someone decided it was a good idea to do a poll and to find out what states really offer its citizens the best opportunities to be civically engaged, particularly around issues of racial equality. So, we're going to be talking to an expert who was involved with this study so that you'll know if you are living in one of those states that rates high on this list or low. I think this is important information that everyone should have. And also important to note, I've been talking about it all hour, the first hour of the show. I want to reiterate it yet again that I am going to be doing not double, not triple, but quadruple duty tomorrow because it is a historic day. It will be the first presidential election ever to be held in June before the November general election. Over 50 million people are expected to tune in to watch former President Donald Trump and current President Joe Biden debate. It's the first of what might be 2 or 3 other presidential debates. And starting at 4 o'clock, Areva Martin in real time will be here. We'll be joined by none other than Tavis Smiley, who is a radio host extraordinaire and also happens to be the owner of KBLA Talk 1580. He's going to join me in the second hour tomorrow to give us his take on what he's going to be looking for in the debate. I'll also be joined by Jared Hill, who is a former president of the National Association of Black Journalists. He's a political analyst as well. So Jared and Tavis will be doing duty with me in the second hour of Areva Martin in Real Time tomorrow. And then at 6 p.m., we are going to bring you the debates without interruptions. You'll be able to stay tuned in to KBLA Talk 1580 to hear the debates that will be from 6 to 9, well, 6 to 7:30 Pacific Standard Time. And then at 7:30, I know it sounds like a lot, but all you have to do is stay tuned in and you'll be able to, catch all of this. At 7:30, we'll take you behind the scenes of the debate hall in Atlanta because our own Dr. Nee will be in Atlanta in that debate hall, joining the hundreds of journalists who will be there from all over the world covering the debate. So he'll give us the tea on what happened inside that debate hall. He'll be with me from 7:30 to 8 uninterrupted. So we will have a lot of time for Dr. Nee to spill the tea on the debate. And then at 8 o'clock from 8 to 9, our post-election coverage. I'll be joined by a roundtable of experts and we'll break down every aspect of that debate. And as a bonus, all of you, my listeners, my viewers, all of KBLA's listeners and viewers, our KBLA delegation, we call you KBLA delegation, will be able to tune in and not just tune in, but join in the conversation because you'll actually be able to call and voice your opinion, state your comment about what you saw, what you heard, and ask my panel of experts any questions you have about the debate. That hotline that you'll be able to use for tomorrow night is 800-920-1580. Again, 800-920-1580. I can't wait to hear from all of you. So KBLA is bringing you the debate tomorrow. Today I'm talking with Christie Matherne. She is the editor of Wallet Hub, and Wallet Hub did something really unique. It commissioned a study to look at the best states and ranked the best states for racial equality and civic engagement. And what an important study to release at this time, particularly given our upcoming national presidential election, all of the important Senate races and the House of Representative races, all of the important local races that are taking place. I'm so excited to be joined by Christine today as we are leading into the big presidential election tomorrow. So it'll be interesting to see if the ranking of the states for racial equality and civic engagement, what relationship we may see in terms of those states' participation, i.e. watching the election tomorrow. I'm sorry, I called her Christine. Her name is Christie. Thank you, Christie, for joining me. Thank you, Wallet Hub, for doing this important work. Let's start with the motivation. Christie, what was the motivation for Wallet Hub to actually commission this kind of study?
Well, we picked this topic for racial equality has been a prominent and important issue lately, as well as in light of protests about police brutality, which gave way to wider discussions on race relations. And through these statistics, we are attempting to measure the degree to which Black Americans have fewer opportunities to engage politically and socially, and which states have more or less disparity.
So, civic engagement, big term, two words, but for folks who maybe don't readily identify with what it means to be civically engaged or what civic engagement is, define for us what that is, for the purposes at least of this study.
Sure. Well, civic engagement in terms of this study is voter turnout rates, like your participation in elections, volunteer rates, like this is a part of social engagement and social participation. And we also measured the rate of veterans, so like participation in civic duty, almost like um, this duty to country. So that's kind of what we were measuring here.
And how many people? So when I think about how you're when you're ranking states, obviously that's a lot of folks you've got to talk to compare. California to New York, New York to Florida. So what was the process by which your researchers used to actually come up with this ranking? I'm going to share the ranking, but I want to make sure people have a really good understanding of how you got to this ranking, because I think people are going to be shocked to hear uh, where their state falls on this chart. So, what was the process by which they used to get to these, these numeric rankings?
Well, actually, all of this data is from the US Census Bureau, the Bureau of Justice Statistics, and the Corporation for National and Community Service. So this is all hard data.
So this is publicly available data. So your researchers just took that data that was out there and obviously used some kind of a equation or algorithm or something to come up with some comparative analysis. Is that what happened?
Right. So we're measuring rates with these things. We are like basically turning it into a percentage versus so obviously there are varying degrees of populations in different states. So we are comparing apples to apples here with percentages.
Mhm. So let's talk about what the rankings are, because again, when I looked at these states, I was like, very interesting. Let's start with the first state, and I guess when I look at this chart, overall ranking, the number one state on here is Arizona, and then number
Right.
two is New Mexico. Both of those shocking to me. Three is Maryland. I'm not so surprised. I am surprised California is number five. I would expect us to be top 10, maybe even one or two. But talk to us about Arizona and New Mexico as one and two.
So across the five metrics that we measured, by metrics, I mean we measured gaps between Black and white residents overall in the rate of single parent households, the rate of adults on parole, the rate of veterans, volunteer rates, and voter turnout rates for presidential elections. So
Hmm.
all of these top states, like Arizona is first because it averaged the best. It ended up with the best grade out of all of these five metrics.
Yeah, here's some interesting, again, stats from this report, particularly going into this presidential election that's happening in November. So you measured voter turnout rate gap. So the highest is Colorado, 32,
Mhm.
Oregon at 33. So what does it mean when you say the highest and then Colorado comes in at 32? What does that mean about voter turnout in Colorado?
That it's wait, that it's 32nd in that category. Is that what you said?
Right. I'm looking at the chart on
Uh-huh.
voter turnout rate gap. And it's
Hmm.
under highest, it has Colorado 32, Oregon 33, Iowa 34, Wisconsin
Oh,
35. And
yes. Okay. So the 32 actually represents the fact that we had a pretty big tie in that category. So if you look at the lowest, there's a tie for first between Mississippi, Maryland, Missouri, Pennsylvania, and Tennessee. And so that kind of skews the total number. And we must have had another tie down that line too.
But so let's talk about the tie between Mississippi, Maryland, Missouri, Pennsylvania, Tennessee. That's the lowest. So does that mean these 5 states that the voter turnout amongst people of color is the lowest in these states?
Yes, that the gap is the lowest. So roughly, I mean, this is without looking at the numbers here, roughly the same amount of Black voters percentage-wise turn out as white voters. Does that make sense?
Oh, okay. So the lowest gap means, so Mississippi, if you're white voter and Black voters in Mississippi turn out pretty much about at the same rate.
Yes, it's possible that it's even just a little bit lower than the same rate, but they all tied for first, so that means they got the same score.
Okay. And so again, that means there's a small gap in between voter turnout amongst Black and white voters in these states. I just want to make sure I'm reading that correctly.
That's exactly right.
Well, that's good news, because that says my state of Missouri has very high Black voter turnout, because it's tied here as the lowest. So that means the gap between Black and white voters in Missouri is pretty small. Again, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just agreeing with you. It's great.
Oh, okay. Mississippi, that's kind of interesting to think that Black and white voters are turning out at the same rate in Mississippi. I wouldn't have expected to see that. I'm not so surprised by Maryland. Pennsylvania's on here, and Tennessee. Any of those surprising to you or your researchers?
I think in this entire study that, yes, a lot of these results are surprising to me, especially because you think there might be some kind of regional trend here, or like, in a lot of the studies that we do, sometimes we'll see a coastal sort of trend going on, or like a southern trend. In this study, it's all over the place. So for voter turnout, yeah, it did surprise me that Mississippi was so equitable. But this is the data.
And then here's something else surprising to me. Massachusetts is on the highest, meaning that the equitable turnout of Black and whites is high in Massachusetts. You think of this super liberal state where voters are highly engaged. It's a Democratic state. I'm surprised. So that's a surprise to me. Did that strike you as odd that Massachusetts would have this high rate of this large gap between Black and white voters?
Yes, it's definitely surprising. And one thing I noted that Massachusetts showed up again on the lower gap scale is in the share of adult population on parole. So roughly the same percentage of Black people are on parole as adults as white people in Massachusetts. So that's another factor to take into account. These things aren't all measuring the same thing. So it's interesting to look at how different states do in different categories.
Yeah, I'm looking at the volunteer rate gap. Again, very interesting category that they measured. So the gap, i.e. the smallest gap between Black and white volunteers, states like New Jersey, tied for first place, Washington, Minnesota, West Virginia. Now that's shocking.
Yes.
Maine and Idaho. So again, this number means if you're a Black person in Maine, you're a white person in Maine, you all are volunteering at about the same rate.
Yeah, that's exactly what that means. And it's somewhat important to note that it's one of our experts that we interviewed for this study to help us add context to this data, mentioned that increasing the volunteer rate in any state could be helped by possibly requiring students to volunteer when they're in high school. So it is possible that some of these states have rules like that in place. So it could be the case we did not look specifically at that. We just checked the volunteer rate.
Yeah, another category that you measured, gap in share of single parent households. So again, hardly any gap in the number of Black versus white single parent households in states like Montana, Idaho, Maine, New Mexico, New Hampshire. Now I wonder, Christy, does this have anything to do with the low number of Black folks that live in states like Montana, Idaho, Maine? I wonder how much of that is driving, these numbers.
That's an interesting point to make. So when we did this study, we did push all these numbers into percentages so that that was at least apples to apples. But another expert that we interviewed for this study to add context to that specifically, he mentioned that, and this is from Jermaine McNair of East Carolina University. He's a sociology instructor. He hypothesized that the four states in the top 10 for this study have less than 10% of an African American population, and that high civic engagement levels there could be a result of assimilation, which tends to happen more frequently when the minority group is disproportionately small. So that is a point that it's a good point to make.
What did he mean by that happens when there's assimilation? Explain that a little more.
That minority groups tend to adopt culture and customs of a larger majority group when the minority group is disproportionately small.
Okay, so when you look at that the states on the top 10, you said the first four, Arizona, New Mexico, but that wouldn't be true of Maryland, would it? I mean, Maryland has
no, it's not the top four. It is 4 states out of the top 10. So
I got it. Okay,
those 4.
Okay, so probably states like Arizona, New Mexico, maybe Maine is in the top 10, maybe Delaware. So smaller Black populations, he says, the sociologist, one of your experts said, you tend to see that smaller group of Black folks assimilating, adopting the culture of the majority group. So in layperson's terms, it just means if you're in a state like Arizona and there are a small number of Black folks, you're going to see the Black folks doing pretty much the same things that the white folks in that state are doing. So if the white folks are volunteering, the Black folks are going to more likely than not volunteer. If the white folks are voting in large numbers, you may see large swaths of the small Black population that's there, again, modeling, assimilating, doing those same things that the white population is doing. Very interesting. Again, some of the findings of this report, states like California and the overall rankings coming in number 5, a state like New Jersey on this list is 14. State like Missouri, my home state, is 18. Really fascinating. The question is always, what is the purpose and what do you hope to accomplish by releasing this study, particularly at this time, given that we are headed into a presidential election?
Right. So I think this report identifies areas where minorities may face fewer opportunities for political and social engagement. And I think this information could be best put to use by policymakers aiming to promote equity, because it really highlights the need for targeted policies that encourage participation in civic life, which could in turn foster a more inclusive and representative society. So I do think it's really spot on for an election year.
So if you're a state that is, the bottom half of this list for or the gap between Blacks and whites in your state in terms of civic engagement is really great. That gap is great, meaning white folks are more civically engaged than Blacks. What advice, does Wallet Hub or any of its experts have for those states?
It's a good question. I would say based on our study and from the commentary on our expert panel, that if you live in one of these states that's on the bottom of our list here, if you want to help civil and societal engagement in your area, one thing you can do is encourage or organize to encourage your local and state governments to bring in economic opportunities and resources for your community. Economics touches so many segments of racial inequality, and taking in the commentary from the expert panel, civic engagement doesn't seem to be any different. Resources can mean better and more inclusive education for kids. It can mean more time for adults to participate in voting and elections and volunteering. And there's a big connection to civil engagement there. So I think focusing on bringing economic opportunities and resources to your community is a good piece of advice. And also, Calvina Ellerby, one of our experts that we talked to, she's at the University of North Carolina at Pembroke. She told us from research that economic inequality has a significant effect on volunteerism. So, and perhaps that's common sense, but it also might be worth spelling out that if you're out there working 3 jobs trying to make ends meet, you don't have time to give back by way of volunteering
Right.
or civic engagement in anything. And a lot of our experts also emphasized focusing on education efforts. So, one of our experts noted that you can encourage your local and state governments to bring race related education to all students, not just minority students, as she calls this kind of the most effective way to promote civic knowledge and self efficacy among minoritized youth. And another expert that we had on our panel, David Canton, the director of African American Studies at the University of Florida, he said that the best avenues to promote civic knowledge are through the home, school, community, church, and other social organizations like that. And you can also host community events, making civic education part of a normalized thing in your community, and also as part of a normalized grade school curriculum. All those things were mentioned by our experts as things to do. And it is worth noting that these are pretty big efforts. These aren't very simple, small steps that a person can take. And one of the most important things anyone can do is vote.
No, no doubt about it. One of the things that I don't see, Christy, in the study is the impact of racism, institutional racism. And I just wonder, states that have these big gaps, say in voter participation or volunteerism,
Mm.
there's some state legislators, because we've seen this by the way that they've acted, they don't want Black participation. In fact, they are enacting laws to suppress Black votes and to suppress Black civic engagement. Have any of your experts addressed that? Because if you're talking to a state that has super GOP, very ultra conservative, legislators, they may not be interested in doing anything to increase voter participation because they feel that Black voters are more likely Democratic voters. So if they vote more, it could jeopardize some of their own seats.
Yeah, exactly. And yes, our experts definitely address this, that there's only so much that a single person can do here when they're battling an institutionalized thing like this, like voter suppression and all kinds of, when they're drawing district lines, even it's very deep. And that's why a lot of these experts were bringing in the topic of economics and resources and how those things, how our own segregation of our lives and our schools, our own self segregation of ourselves has kind of taken resources away from Black communities because things are separate and people are treated differently, and that is a fact. It's difficult to address in a study for sure.
Well, again, thank you so much for the work that Wallet Hub has done. Thank you for the experts that joined you in this effort. Obviously, such important information. There will be some states, as you just stated, and as I stated, that perhaps won't be interested in this information because they're not interested in closing the gap. But there will be many, I hope, that will take this information to heart, many state and local governments, and look for ways that they can close the gap, particularly around issues like volunteerism or voter participation, because we know our democracy is made better when everyone exercises their rights, even if they're Democrats or Republicans, doesn't matter what your party affiliation is, but having a civically engaged, constituency is just good for the nation. It's good for your state, good for your local government, and good for our democracy. So again, thank you so much for this work. We look forward to seeing how it is utilized by some of the states and cities, particularly those that got what I'll call very low scores. We got a lot of work to do, some of these states. Again, Christie, appreciate your time.